David, are you ready to start?
I am ready to rock and roll, Andy. Thank you. Hey, first off, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. And again, as Andy just said, I hope you have these packets in front of you. My packet is 38 pages long. Hopefully you got all 38 pages. But let's go to, in front of page 1, there's a table of contents. And let me kind of give you the navigation of how we're going to cover this next 2 hours. The first hour, I'm going to roll through Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's the what does HMDA apply to, what doesn't apply to. And that really is half of the battle, is finding out is this a HMDA application or not. And then we'll take about a 5-minute walk-away break. We'll come back, do some questions and answers, so let's see what time we have there. But then we'll cover Romans 5, number 5 through 16. That's more of the, I know I've got a HMDA application, now how do I report it? So just so you know, and you can ask questions whenever, and Andy will give me those, but I'm going to try to cover this again. What does HMDA apply to? What doesn't apply to it? And that first question break, we're going to try to stick to those kinds of questions versus the technicalities of, okay, how do we report this, or the data and things. The other thing I want you to notice is there's a bullet at the very bottom of that table of contents, and I just want to clarify, when you see things in italices in this packet, I'm quoting from the regulation. So go to page 1 with me, and you'll see, like in Roman numeral 2A, B, C, a lot of italices, especially in the beginning. That's straight from the horse's mouth. Now, something that I always do is, where did that come from? I want to teach you how to fish rather than hand you a fish. So at the end of Roman numeral 2A there, you'll see in brackets, I'm taking that from section 1003.2. So you can go look it up further. I'm always in the mentality of never believe me. I might misspeak today, or you might misunderstand, or whatever. You can then have the source so you can dig deeper and find out more. So when you see non-italices things, I just want you to know I'm just making that stuff up. So that was a joke. So, all right, let's get into this. What's the purpose of HMDA? HMDA is a fair lending regulation. It's all about statistics. And so we're going to, in a negative way of saying this, is hand the examiners a bunch of rope so they can hang us. Hopefully not. But it's a fair lending focus. And there'll be some places the next 2 hours where I'll bring that back up. They garbage in, garbage out. So they are hugely sticklers on accurate data being reported, consistent data being reported, and they're micro-examining a lot of these fields, and that's why the big deal. And I do believe statistically HMDA is still the most penalized regulation. Now, there's bigger violations when you get into OFAC and Bank Secrecy Act and flood sets and big ones, but by far and away, HMDA is the most common. I think flood's catching up, though. Most common to have so money. Enough about that. I don't like scare tactics, just so you understand. Coverage. Well, let's talk about the institutions first. There's an asset test that says you have to have assets over a certain threshold, and in 2013, that was $42 million. It just went up to $43 million in January of 14. And you have a home office or a branch office in a metropolitan statistical area or metropolitan area. That's the two tests. So there's a couple ways to get out of HMDA. One is to sell branches and offices in metropolitan areas, and then you don't have to do HMDA. The second one is to sell assets to get below $43 million, and you don't have to do HMDA. So if that's not an option for you, let's go on. Letter B. Now, I want you to focus on the heading there, applications. HMDA is not a loan regulation. It's not if you make these people a loan. It's when you receive an application. And you're going to hear me use that term, application regulation, I think at least 3 different times in 3 different contexts. It's applications for these 3 types of loans. And we'll get into the definition of them in just a little bit. So pick up your pens. There's a lot of things that I do where I want you to circle, highlight, or I don't even have it in our packet. I'm going to say write this down, because when you engage your brain by writing, you are more likely to remember things. So catch that. Applications for home purchase, home improvement, and refinancing loans. Let's talk about the definition of dwelling. It's different than most other consumer regs. In fact, this isn't a consumer reg. It is much more far-reaching than that. Dwelling is any residential structure. So you can even see by the pictures that we have on the screen right now, there's single-family dwellings, but there's apartment buildings and a teepee, I guess. It'd be where anybody resides. Now, there's some little buts, if you will. It does include condominiums, cooperatives, mobile manufactured homes. I don't need land, in other words. If you look at the second paragraph, you'll see that it's not limited to principal. So we're going to get vacation homes, second homes, rental properties, multifamily structures, apartment buildings, those types of things. It's where anybody resides. Now, here comes the however. Look at the commentary, the last thing on page 1, the exclusion. Recreational vehicles and transitory residents are excluded. The problem is, what does that mean? And this is the first time in the next 2 hours we're going to come to this. Gosh, it depends. They don't really give good definitions. Now, the transitory, they explain, such as hotels, hospitals, college dorms, where somebody can live somewhere else. I get that one, but let me throw a wrinkle into that. My mother, before she passed away several years ago, lived in this retirement village, and let me try to draw you a picture of what this place looked like. In the middle, there was a hospital, a long-term care, where people would go and they would pretty much finish out their life there. That would be transitory. But attached to that was like an apartment complex where the residents pretty much lived on their own, and they got their meals, though, provided. There was a doctor, things like that. So it was an assisted living type of complex. I would say that's not transitory because it's more like an apartment building. And then surrounding those two things in the center were like 47 different duplexes where those people absolutely lived on their own, cared for themselves. They were in this retirement village where they had access to the doctors and the pharmacy and other people of their age, but they were all on their own, had their own mailing address and everything. Now, let's say a borrower comes to you, an applicant comes to you and wants to buy that entire complex. What is it? Is it transitory? Well, yes. Or is it an apartment building? Well, yes. Is it, it's both. And when you get into these multiple use properties, HMDA basically, without saying it, when you read the whole thing, says you've got to declare that to be a dwelling or not. So you're going to say, we're going to call this a dwelling, or we're not going to call it a dwelling. And I'll come to a related area in a little bit where it talks about, look at the square footage and income and all that. But you decide, is that a dwelling or not? Motels, imagine where the proprietors have this, where they live, maybe their family behind the front desk, and then there's 12 units. Well, that's where they live. It's not transitory for them, but the motel is. And so is that mixed-use property a dwelling or not? And that's where it gets kind of weird. And you've got to decide, and you declare that as a dwelling or not a dwelling. Now let me go to the recreational thing. Not all boats and campers are recreational. If you go to Seattle, there's a lot of people who live on houseboats or in the Gulf or in other places in the United States. So just because it floats doesn't mean it's recreational. If somebody resides there, even as a vacation home, then it's not really something, and there's a fine line there between, well, it's a boat, but they could spend the night on it, and they might a couple days out of the year, but that's really recreational for them. Okay, think about the things that go down the highway on wheels. I have an aunt that basically lives in what you might call an RV. She doesn't even have a house anywhere, though. She comes and stays with people, relatives, until we kick her out, kind of like Eddie on Christmas Vacation, if you can see that. But that's her house, is this $350,000 RV. That's not recreational for her. She doesn't pull it to the lake on the weekends. That's her home. And so not all campers or RVs are recreational. So I just want you to think outside the box. In fact, HMDA is full of paradigm shifts like that. Now, if you got your pens handy, write down two things. Number one, be consistent. Be consistent. I'm not saying that every camper then becomes an RV or every camper is not an RV, but when you come to these multi-unit things, let's not sometimes say it this way and sometimes that way, and somebody else on the outside would say, I don't see the difference. You've got to have a consistent gatekeeper that probably says, okay, I know you're thinking of it this way, but our bank says it's that way. And I'm going to throw another little wrinkle in, especially when we get into temporary financing, very arguable, I don't know, that's not a word, I'm talking about, debatable topic. You need someone that declares the consistency, because loan officer A might have a different answer than loan officer B. We need a referee in the middle, a gatekeeper. So let's be consistent. The second thing I want you to write down is slam the door. Slam the door. What do I mean by that? Don't leave things open for debate with examiners. say, this is HMDA,